No matter where you might be in your life, you have likely been through tough times. You have likely been through tough challenges. You have likely had successes and failures. You've likely had things that have caused you to get scraped, bruised, beaten up, maybe laid flat out on your back, metaphorically or literally, as you climb that ladder of success. As you build that, whatever you call personal success or personal excellence, you've had to go through the gauntlet. And guess what? That gauntlet is one of the best leadership development training programs you'll ever go through. It's called Real Life. The School of Hard Knocks is going to be way better than any business school or any military academy or any of this other bullshit. Most important leadership lesson you can learn is from going through the paces and putting in the work, putting in the reps, and actually doing the thing. I will tell you from personal experience, going from the lowest rank in the military to becoming a combat decorated Navy pilot, the best leadership lessons I ever learned didn't come from a book, didn't come from a class, definitely didn't come from a webinar. It came from working with and leading excellent people that started with working on myself and leading myself to become the best version of myself. And you can do the exact same thing starting right now. What's up, my friends? JT DeBolt with you today for the True Driven Podcast, the podcast for the few, the true, the driven, those of us who have aligned and united to become the true driven. And I say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time it is for you, no matter where you might be tuning in from on the Big Blue Marble. Thank you as always, for joining me here. And by here, I'm talking about Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube, youtube.com/JT DeBolt. Perhaps my favorite of all the platforms, because that's where I can bring you more diverse content on a regular basis. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications so you can be the first to know and stay in the know when I drop new stuff for you each and every single week. And today, I'm dedicating this to every single one of you who have ever felt like you might be unqualified to step into that next level, that next role, especially if you feel like that role is a leadership role and you're thinking to yourself, who am I to lead? Who am I to take that next big step in my business, my career? Maybe you want to step outside of the career you're in to start your own business. Maybe you want to take on another new business, another new task, another new huge responsibility. You might be asking yourself, am I really qualified for this? Who am I to do this? You start creating that self-doubt and that concern that maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you weren't built for this. I want to talk to you about this because I know exactly how that feels, or at least I can imagine how it might feel. Of course, I don't know how it feels for you personally. I don't know what your personal experience is with it, but I do have quite a bit of experience with this type of thing. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory on this in just a moment, but I want to let you know first and foremost, if you are in a situation right now where you have a big vision for yourself, you've got a dream that you want to pursue, something that's important to you, and you are even doubting for a second that whatever that thing is too big for you, that's probably one of the most important first markers that you can have that tells you that you're on a path that might be the path you need to go down. The old hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell would call it. It's that urging, it's that kind of push, it's that slight inclination that there's something bigger, better, more amazing, more excellent for you. And it's going to require everything of you in order to attain it and to achieve it. The whole concept of it being daunting is enough to maybe make you second guess whether or not this is even something you should be pursuing. I get that. And if that's for you, if right now that's a reality for you, I want to let you know that I think that's one of the most important things you can have in your consciousness. Because even if you are a successful business person, even if you are somebody who has kind of hit a peak in your career, it's okay to think, man, is there more? Is there something I could push for? And you might be second guessing or doubting that. You might even have those doubts coming from other people. They may doubt your ability to follow through and perform at that next level. This message goes out to you if you fall into that category on any part of the spectrum, whether it's a high high level of awareness of that or just a slight consciousness of it. If you subscribe to that and you're like, man, that is me 100%, or maybe it's just a little bit. I want you to pay close attention because this leadership development message is going to be specifically for those entrepreneurs who are growing their leadership with the vision and the intention of taking on more responsibility and showing up and delivering more for the world around them. A couple of years ago, somebody that a close friend of mine, somebody I trust, actually kind of did something that was uncool. Talked some shit about me online behind my back. And when it was pointed out by friends, mutual friends and people that I trust, of course, I saw the post and I was instantly knew who he was talking about. This person denied that it was about me. And it had something to do with leadership. And it was interesting because it was very directed. You might think because you have a podcast or because you were in the military or whatever, that you're somehow this leadership development person, when in fact, unless you've built a multi-million-dollar team and blah, 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 one of all these things, you are indeed not a leader. It was frustrating because, frankly, the guy's full of shit. And the message itself was one of insecurity and, quite frankly, an overinflamed ego that was, seeking out validation for people. And of course, he got it from his followers and his echo chamber, which happens a lot on social media. I don't really care about that, nor do I want to talk about it, but it was interesting because it got me thinking, what actually qualifies me personally as a leader? And I want to share a couple of things that I've learned on the lessons of life on this path that I've been on for leadership, about leadership and leadership development for what seems like pretty much my entire life. I can say several decades. And I want to share these lessons with you because I truly believe that you have the capability of being the greatest leader possible for yourself, for your family, for your teams, for the people you lead, even if it's your community. Maybe it's something bigger than just your family, bigger than just the people that you work with. Maybe it's an entire group of people. Maybe you have huge aspirations for your leadership. This message is designed for you to learn from that. It's about earning your stripes. It's about what it takes to grow through your leadership, no matter where you're starting from. If this is day one, if you're young, if you're coming up in the ranks, this is going to be important for you. If you're one of those people that's been around the block a few times, made a few left turns around the sun, so to speak, this message is equally for you. My backstory, a lot of you already know this, especially you true drivens that have been around for a while, know that ever since I was a kid, I had the aspirations of becoming a Navy pilot, a Naval Aviator, specifically flying for the Blue Angels. That was what my dream was since I was a kid. But early in life, I was diagnosed with A.D.D, attention deficit disorder. And back then, it was pretty unknown. They didn't really know how to deal with it. And a lot of times they thought it was going to be something debilitating, something that would basically limit anybody from having any measure of a very successful life. Now, we have to kind of step back a second and realize this was back in the 80s. And back then, A, they didn't know how to deal with it. And B, the concept of having a successful life pretty much meant that you had some college degree with a high-paying 6 or 7-figure business or job or whatever. It wasn't necessarily the way we expanded out the concept of success today. That's a whole different topic for a whole nother day, but I want to kind of paint the picture and let you know that that's the reality I was living with from the time I was about 8 years old. I had people of influence, teachers, coaches, friends, even very close family members of mine saying, there is no way you are ever going to attain this dream of being a Navy pilot. At best, you may become a diesel mechanic or an aircraft mechanic or something to that extent, as if that was something bad. Now, by the way, let me just say personally, the JT DeBolt vision on that, or the JT DeBolt opinion on that is, I think diesel mechanics and aircraft mechanics and the trades in general are fucking amazing. I have nothing but the deepest level of respect and admiration for any man or woman that pursues those professions. But it wasn't said to me in that light. It was said to me as a slight. It was said to me as if to say, hey, your dreams are too good for you, based on this, quote, diagnosis of A.D.D. Well, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, going into your early teens, It's very difficult, especially when you have people that you love, know, and trust limiting you, telling you that there's a limit to your capability, a limit to what's possible for you. That was the first lesson of leadership that I had to learn, was that self-leadership, which is one reason I'm so passionate about training and teaching you guys. My leadership development training is mostly about self-leadership, because if we start with the self, we can expand those lessons out and help other people, help our teams. But it's very difficult to lead a team if you haven't first learned to lead yourself. That's lesson number one. Now, the second part to this, and I think it's very important to really wrap our heads around, is the idea that as you're developing your own personal leadership, that leadership growth and that leadership development is predicated on having a vision for something bigger and further out than just your own needs and your own desires and dreams. Early in my life, the dream of becoming a Navy Blue Angel was an isolated thing. It was for me, but I could see the impact that it had, because when I was about 15, I actually had the opportunity to meet one of the Blue Angels, Commander Gil Rude. He was the number one pilot. They call him the boss, the one who, for the flight lead for the Blue Angels, his call sign is boss. And I got to meet him after an air show, after they just got done flying their demonstration. And he signed my autograph, and I told him my story about how I wanted to be a pilot, but most people didn't believe in me, all this kind of stuff. And he said, JT, listen, if you put your head down and you get to work and you apply yourself to it, you could do anything. You could become a Blue Angel. You can become anything you want. You just got to work for it. You got to want it. You got to know what it is, and you got to get after it. It was amazing. It was the first time that anybody in that career field had ever taken the time to address me individually, knowing the story that I'd shared with him, a little bit of backstory, and then still unflinchingly gave me support to my dream. That's something that I would encourage all of us, you, me, anybody that we can associate with, to do more of, is to have a nurturing, a positive impact, not a positive in a sense like you're pumping somebody full of bullshit and motivation. I'm talking about the ability to help them see through the darkness, see through the fog, see through the self-doubt, and be able to understand that they do have what it takes, the capabilities to see through, to work through those things. And even if they can't see the end in the goal, to at least continue to take each step, one step in front of the other, because that's ultimately all it really takes. You probably know this if you've ever achieved anything of significance, which I'm sure you have. You know that it's just about putting one foot in front of the next and continuing on the path. Well, when I graduated high school, barely, I might add, I had really no option. I didn't have the grades to go off to college, which was a prerequisite to becoming a Navy pilot. To become a Navy pilot, by the way, in the U.S. Navy, you have to be a fully commissioned officer. In some branches of the U.S. Military, for instance, the Army, you can be a warrant officer, which means that you do not have to have a 4-year college degree. Now, some of them do, many of them do, but you don't have to. It's not a prerequisite to become an aviator in the Army, for instance, because you could just become a warrant officer, and I don't mean just become as if it's a small thing, it's a big deal, and then go off to their flight school, become a helicopter pilot. But in the Navy, it doesn't matter what you fly, you have to first get your 4-year degree from an accredited college, then get your commission as an officer, then you go off to flight school if you get selected for it, make it through flight school, and then you get your wings of gold. So it's quite a involved process. And I knew that I had basically a stream I had to swim up against. I was swimming against the current the whole way, because academically I was not strong. Testing wise, I was not strong. I was just not a good tester, if you will. But I did whatever it took to become the person that could get into college. Now, the U.S. Navy, just like every branch of the service, has different programs where enlisted guys like me could work up and become officers. So I applied 6 different times for these various different programs to go off to college to get my degree and then therefore go to flight school. And every single application I put in, all 6 times, the U.S. Navy turned me down. They said, no, You're not officer material. You're not leadership material. You're not aviator material. We love what you're doing, working on aircraft and jets, but this is the end of the road for you. This is all there is going to be. So I had a decision to make when my 4-year commitment was up. I could either continue on this path as an aircraft mechanic, and I got to tell you, the words echoing in my head were those that were fed to me ever since I was a kid. You're barely graduated high school. You're not cut out for this. A.D.D, you get the whole idea. It's very easy to listen to those voices and those messages. My friend, you have to learn to block that out because those are the voices of liars. They are lying to you. Now, is it possible that there is a limit to as far as you can go in a certain career field? For sure. Maybe you have an injury or a physical, thing that holds you back from being able to do something like play professional sports, for instance. Or maybe you want to be a professional basketball player, but like me, you're not even 6 feet tall. Okay, great. That's a problem. So there are certain things in life that we have to accept as limitations, but the vast majority of the limitations that we are dealing with in life are up here. We put them on ourselves. They're the limitations between our left and right eardrum, and we do it to ourselves, or we listen to the limitations that other people fed to us as opposed to challenging them. We just accept them. It's important to be that self-leader. Remember what I was talking about, self-leadership. Leadership really starts with ourselves first. We have to be willing to lead ourselves first. That's the number one first lesson of leadership. And anybody can do this. You don't have to have a multi-million-dollar team under you to be called a leader. In fact, you could still have a multi-million-dollar team underneath you and still be a shitty leader because you haven't learned that very important lesson of personal self-leadership first. Now, the next element to this was as soon as I got out of the Navy, I went to work some odd jobs. I decided I was going to get out because I didn't want to continue down the path of chasing somebody else's version of what I thought was possible for myself or what they thought was possible for me. So I got out of the Navy, worked some odd jobs, worked as a dishwasher, did all this kind of stuff, worked construction for a long time, and then eventually went back to a community college because that's as good as I could do. But here's the thing. It's about putting your foot in the door. It's about doing whatever you can. Yes, was it the perfect version of going off to some major college? Nope. Was it the version of going off to like the military academies and going that route? Absolutely not. It was a community college. And so many people look down on that and think, you weren't smart enough to get into a big college. You weren't good enough to get into the military academies. You weren't the type of person of character or strength or skill to be able to do these things. And that's bullshit. Again, we accept limitations. And those limitations oftentimes are the only thing. They're held together by the thinnest of threads that we could snap with just a little bit of effort. And that effort starts up in our head. So I went to community college, did well enough academically to get accepted into a major 4-year university, University of Colorado at Boulder. That's where I went into ROTC. Whole nother story for a whole nother day, but long story endless. I actually ended up getting my degree, which surprised pretty much everybody. Graduated from ROTC, went on to flight school in the U.S. Navy, got accepted to flight school, and then went through flight training and graduated on September 7th, 2001, just 4 days before the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Now, I share this with you because that was a path and a journey that was a lifelong pursuit. And for those of you who have heard me talk about the big four, values, vision, mission, and purpose, this was not a dream. This was not a goal to become a Navy pilot. It was my mission. And if you haven't heard that, go check out the video or the podcast, and you can hear it. When I talk about the power of vision. We'll talk more about vision, power of mission. We'll talk more about vision and mission in different later podcasts. But I share this with you because it's really important to understand that this was not just a simple, small thing. Going on to flight school, getting accepted to it, let alone graduating, going through the whole rigors of flight training and an attrition rate that was north of 80%. 80% of the folks who join mostly don't make it. So you're talking about less than 20% of the people who show up on day one of flight school don't ever see graduation day. That's a tough number to kind of swallow. But to make it through all of that, you have to be a person that has a vision and it has a sense of mission and a sense of purpose behind it. That's how I was able to do that. Another talk for another day. What are the lessons here? Graduating flight school was just the beginning. In fact, when they put their wings on our chest, they're like, this is a license to learn. You have not graduated. You're just beginning. And it's crazy to find out how true that was. So I would like to share with you a couple of lessons that I learned from working through the ranks from the lowest rank, E1 in the U.S. Navy, up to becoming a combat decorated naval aviator. Lessons of leadership that could only be learned through that gauntlet. Now, do you have to join the military to be a great leader? No. Do you have to build a multi-million-dollar business to be considered a great leader? Abso-fucking-lutely not. Do you have to be in a high level of leadership, a position of leadership, to be considered a great leader? The answer is no. Leadership is a pursuit. I do not believe that there are natural-born leaders. I think there are people who have a propensity for leadership. Just like some folks have a propensity for athleticism or music or dance or art. Some people just naturally love it and they find their kind of groove early in life. I had no choice. I didn't have somebody guiding me along to show me the path to find my dream. I had to find it out for myself. I had to develop the processes and the behaviors and the follow through, the stuff I teach you guys here in the True Driven community. I had to figure that shit out for myself. And so for me, it was not a question of, well, can I become a leader or do I need to become a leader? It was an absolute must. And that's how come I can tell you from great experience with a fuckload of experience on that path and that road of hard knocks, the school of hard knocks and the road that leads up to it, right? Is this: you absolutely positively can and must develop your leadership. You positively can and must become the best, strongest leader that you can, not just for yourself, but for the people that you serve. Whether just the people you serve are simply your family, maybe they're the people on your teams at work, maybe it's the business you're growing and the customers and the people you serve, or maybe it's something even bigger than that. It doesn't matter the scope. What matters is that you seize the day recognizing that you are and can be a great leader, and you can develop yourself into it, whether you are right now or not, whether you see yourself that way or not. You have what it takes to build that kind of leadership foundation, but it starts right now. So let me just talk about the first one. One of the first lessons I learned early in my military career that translated through all levels of leadership, from the time I was the lowest rank all the way until I got out and I was an officer, was this: you are never too good for any job or task. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter how good looking you are, how physically fit you are, how wealthy you might be. It doesn't matter what your family creed is. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your schooling might be. It doesn't matter where you grew up. It doesn't matter what part of the world or part of the country you came from. You are never too good for any job or task. What's interesting is I learned this the hard way. There were times where I was like, you know what? I've been doing this job for a few years now. I've outgrown this. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not taking out the trash. I'm not mopping the floor, swabbing the deck, as we used to call it. I'm not doing that stuff. I'm not taking that late duty. Well, guess what? Here's the crazy part. When I left the enlisted ranks, went to college, came back as an officer, I basically started off at the ground zero again, at the bottom ranks. But here's the crazy part. I had a competitive advantage over my peers who never had the experience of being prior enlisted. Their experience in the military was to go through ROTC, which is basically a college training course, a class that you take in college for 4 years. They teach theory of leadership in textbook form and in classroom form, but very little practical experience with it. Very, very little actual real world application of leadership. There's some, very, very minor, but not really any high stakes leadership. There's officer candidate school. Some people call that the 90-day wonder, right? You walk in fresh off the street, and 90 days later, it's basically concentrated boot camp, very intense. You walk out, you got your commission, you're an officer. And then, of course, there's the other side, and that's where you go off to the military academies for 4 years. And even then, even though that's a lot more of an immersive experience, an immersive training program for leaders, there still is lacking in that program, and all three of those options, the real world application where you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in an actual situation where leadership is a must. Even if you're an E1, you have to have some form of leadership. What's interesting is one of the first things you learn, and sometimes for some people, I'll be honest, it's a hard way. I had to learn it the hard way. I came in with a little bit of a fuck you attitude. I'll be honest. I had a little bit of a, still do, rebel streak in me. Maybe not a little, maybe a lot. And the military has an amazingly efficient way of getting that out of you very quickly. There were times where there were jobs I didn't want to do. I didn't want to clean the bathroom. I didn't want to take out the trash. I didn't want to, pull chow duty, working in the chow hall. But you got to do what you got to do. You get assigned those jobs and you do them, whether you like them or not. Entrepreneurs definitely have to learn this. It's one of the most important business skills, is the ability to not just embrace the suck, but to realize that there's no job beneath you. You are not above anything in your business. There might be things that you need to offload. There might be things that you need to delegate. You might need to leverage people who are smarter than you. We'll get to that in a second. But at some point, you have to realize that there is nothing beneath you, that you are not better than any task or any job that is required. And I learned that both as an enlisted guy, and I had to relearn it as an officer when I was the junior officer having to go get chow for my entire crew before we went and flew our combat missions over Afghanistan. Very humbling. Very, very humbling. Knowing that there's no job or no task beneath you is a very humbling thing. But here's the cool part, is it starts to take your ego and put it in check. Ego is one of the biggest killers to leadership. You can have a massive ego, but it's got to be in check. Naval aviators inherently have big egos. Let's just be honest. Type A, very aggressive, very competitive environment. Doesn't matter what what you see on TV or what you hear in the movies or read in the books. It's a very, very high stakes, intense, competitive career. So naturally, there's going to be ego involved. But here's the cool part about that. That ego is always in check, because there's always going to be somebody bigger, better, and stronger than you, more qualified, more capable than you. And all it takes is you to lip off, and find that shit out real quick. Same goes in business. The difference is that a lot of times in entrepreneur space, it's all about the bravado, isn't it? It's all about the ego. What can you show on social media? How much of an image can you put out there so that everybody thinks, oh, fuck yeah, that guy's amazing because he's got a real shiny car that he leases and rents and doesn't actually own. Oh, he's got that big house that he leases or rents but doesn't own. But we look at that and think that that's what leadership's about. We think, oh, he must be an awesome, or she must be a great leader because they have this success. They've attained this high level of financial, capability. When in reality, guys, that's not leadership. You and I both know that. You can have somebody who's not making that kind of money still be a strong leader and have the capability of growing into that financial status. And that's an even better place to be. I would rather take a person who's building their strength in leadership over the person who has found that quick hit success financially, because I know the person that's building the strength and the foundation of leadership will maintain the financial status far longer and far more sustainably than the person who had the quick hit without the leadership background. It's just that simple. Lesson number 2 that I learned through coming up through the ranks is always listen to your people. Sometimes your people are actually going to know more than you. In fact, very often. Case in point, as an enlisted guy, I actually earned my way into becoming a flight deck troubleshooter, meaning I was one of the final checkers before we launched jets off the carrier. So if you ever seen Top Gun and they do the whole, everybody doing the hand signals and launching the jets off the carrier, I was part of that team. I was one of those team members doing that. My job was to ensure that the cabin pressurization, the oxygen system, and the ejection seat systems all operated with flawlessly. One time in a pre-flight check, we're getting ready to launch the jet, and the ejection seat, one of the aircrew got into, had a malfunction basically in the pre-flight check, not the actual ejection. They didn't try to eject and it didn't work, but it would not have worked. So they came to me and they said, hey, can you take a look at this? This is right before we're going to launch him off the carrier. I looked at it and I'm like, it's down. The jet can't fly because this ejection seat doesn't work. And heaven forbid you guys get in a situation where you have to eject. This guy's not getting out. He's going to die. So I had to tell them just minutes before they're going to launch on this mission that they're not going. They were fucking pissed. I'm sure you can imagine, frustrated. And of course, they probably took it out on me. I don't remember, but I remember feeling an intense sense of responsibility. Like I have to make the call. And everybody was waiting on me as an E4. Now I'd work my way up from E1. Now I'm an E4, right? So still real low on the totem pole, but I have officers, including my commanding officer, who is looking at me like, what are we doing? And I'm telling him, sir, the jet's down for a combat mission. He took my word because he trusted me, my qualifications, the skills that I had developed, and of course, the position I was in as a final checker. The word final checker means exactly what it means. You're the person checking the aircraft, the jet, before it gets launched off to ensure that it is good to go for flight. And when I said it's not, he trusted me. That's excellent leadership. So there's two sides to this leadership. One was my ability to be able to make the tough call under pressure. That is very important as an entrepreneur. Anything, it doesn't matter, even if you're not an entrepreneur, if you're not running your own business, if you are leading other people, if there are people counting on you, they are looking to you to make the call. And sometimes you're going to have to make that call under pressure. And it's going to be a difficult, tough call to make, and you're not going to feel great about it, and it's going to feel shitty in the moment. But guess what? That's what you have to do. You have to. The second part to that is, if we look at my commanding officer's position, is the ability to take the rank off the shoulder and look at the person and say, he has the perspective that I don't. I don't love the decision, but we're not flying this airplane. And ultimately, they did not fly the airplane. The backup crew flew it and flew the mission. Later on in my career as an officer, we had a very similar situation on September 11th, 2002, the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. We were set to fly a combat mission. We were the primary crew, and with the exception of myself and the co-pilot, who was my mission commander, aircraft commander, the whole 9 yards, a department head, basically my boss, we were the only two who weren't sick. There was a stomach virus going around, some possible food poisoning, and everybody on the crew was sick. Now, you have to understand, we're about to go fly a 10-hour mission over hostile territory, and you've got a whole crew of people who are compromised with their health and their ability to do their job, to do the mission effectively. On top of that, we also had a backup crew, just like my skipper, my commanding officer did when I was an enlisted guy. Now we have a backup crew. So I made this comment as we're strapping into the cockpit. I said to my aircraft commander, hey, sir, everybody but you and I is sick on this airplane. I don't think it's safe for us to fly. I think we should defer this one to our backup. He looked me in the eye and said, noted, before start checklist. Basically, I'm listening to you, but I don't really care. We did the before start checklist. We flew the flight. Highly irresponsible. This dude was leading with his ego. All he wanted was the glory of flying this mission on the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. A mission that could have easily been flown by our backup crew who were totally and highly capable of doing the mission. But this was about his ego. And to this day, I still use that and see that as a very valuable leadership lesson to ensure that I don't do that to my team. You have to understand, you will have people who work for you, who are junior to you, beneath you in rank for all intents and purposes, who are going to give you feedback. And if you're really smart and if you're a great leader, you're going to be actively seeking out that feedback. There will be times when that feedback will not be what you want to hear. They're going to give you input, information, ideas, things that will go against your big vision. It's important as a leader to have a vision, right? To have a sense of that so that you don't get knocked off course by crazy stuff or inappropriate things or things that quite frankly just don't match. So there's that. But at the same level, the ability to pull the ego aside, listen, critically think, and assess whether or not what they're feeding to you makes sense. Had my aircraft commander done that, the right call would have been, you're right. Let's shut it down. Let's hand it off to the backup crew. Let's let everybody rest up and let's fight to see another day. So my point is this, is that it's very important to always be listening to the people around you, your teammates, your peers. Sometimes that can be really hard because you might be competing with them. It might be one of those things where you desperately want to outperform somebody, but you're going to take feedback from them because, well, they're smart or they have a perspective that maybe you haven't. Maybe they've been down the path. Maybe they've had a failure that you've had. Maybe they've made mistakes that you've made. Maybe there's been something in their journey or their experience that you can learn from and therefore bypass that painful experience yourself. And wouldn't that be great? So it's very important to listen to your people, especially the people that work for you, that work under you, possibly your subordinates or people that you outrank or you're somehow further ahead. Always listen to your people. A third very powerful lesson that I learned working my way up from E1 as an enlisted aircraft mechanic to becoming a combat decorated Navy pilot was that one aw shit will trump 1,000 attaboys. We used to say this all the time. It's a little bit of saying one aw shit, meaning one mistake, one major fuck up will completely wipe out all of the adoration, accolades, and good shit you've done in the front, before that. It happened to me when I was an enlisted guy. Another time launching a jet off a carrier, I was trusted to pull the pins off the landing gear. So if you've ever seen an aircraft, especially a military aircraft, there's little pins with a red flag that says remove before flight. My job was to pull one pin off the starboard landing gear, the right side of the aircraft. Well, I pulled it, or I didn't pull it, and we launched the jet without the pin or with the pin still on the landing gear, which means that when they went to pull the landing gear up after takeoff, after it launched off the carrier, that gear wouldn't come up. They took off and the nose gear and the left landing gear goes up, but the starboard landing gear on the right side stayed down. Instantly, my heart sank. I'm like, oh shit. My buddy who was doing the aircraft launch with me goes, did you pull the pin? I'm like, I thought so. Like all of a sudden my brain blanked. I couldn't remember. Well, obviously I didn't. They had to come around. They had to dump fuel. They had to dump all their fuel. So they were light enough to land on the carrier, not, collapse the landing gear. We had to launch the backup crew. So that crew missed their opportunity at that combat mission because I fucked up. Man, that was brutal. That was brutal. And up to that point, I had already been on track to become like the sailor of the quarter and do all these things, get these accolades, kind of think of it like employee of the quarter, right? And my point is this, is that it's one of those things that just happens. What was great about it was the aircraft commander, the pilot, got out. He knew it was my fault. He patted me on the back. He said, tomorrow's another day. Suck it up. And then walked away. He was totally cool with it. He basically acknowledged that I was upset. He knew that I was taking it seriously. So it wasn't me just like, oh, well, fuck him, right? He knew that it meant the world to me that that crew was safe and that jet got off the deck so we could accomplish the mission. It was obviously important to him as well. So there was a mutual respect there. And when you're a leader, one of the most important things you can do is to seek out that mutual respect. So if you've got people that work for you that make a mistake, or maybe you're the one that made the mistake, beating yourself up or beating up the person who fucked up is not helping the mission. Acknowledging it is, figuring out what caused it and how to pivot around that so it doesn't happen again, communicating that, troubleshooting that, collaborating, very important. That's great leadership. But to beat somebody up over that does not work. And especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're a solopreneur, you might be master of all things. You might be the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and all of a sudden you fuck up one of those roles and it throws everything off. Well, the more time you spend spinning your wheels, beating yourself up, or thinking about what went wrong, the less time and energy you actually have to put forth to get the fucking mission back on track. Very important. And on the converse, if you've got people working for you, whether it's in your business or maybe you've got a role at work and you've got a lot of people who answer to you, you got to be willing to realize these are human beings. They're not robots. They have dreams. They have desires. They have fears. They have a lot of things that are on their plate. So sometimes as humans, we're going to fuck up. One of the best ways to mitigate those mistakes and to ensure that there's a great line of communication all up and down the chain of command is to constantly be building those bonds. We used to call it walking the deck plates. One thing I will tell you, one competitive advantage I had over my peers who basically just went off to college or went to the Naval Academy or whatever, and then came in with no background and no experience was I knew what it was like to walk a mile in the shoes of an enlisted guy because I was one. I knew what it was like to eat shitty chow. I knew what it was like to work long hours for shitty pay. I knew what it was like to be asked to do the fucking dirty jobs while the officers were out at the bar having a great night at the O Club. I knew what that was like. So when it came time to be in charge and to actually have those guys under my charge, I understood how to communicate with them because I could empathize with their position. It doesn't mean I was down there doing the job and the work with them. That's a key and essential leadership thing. You're not doing the work with the guys necessarily. I mean, it doesn't hurt to maybe put on the overalls and wash the jet with them every now and then. But to do it on the daily, you don't have time for that. They're not looking to you to be one of them. They want to know that you understand what it's like to be in the role. And if you've never been in the role, maybe it's time to walk the deck plates. Get to know the people that work with you and for you. Get a sense for what their job is so that you can appreciate the work that they put in and appreciate the talent and the skill that's required to do that job. No matter how menial it might seem to you now, if you take the time to walk the deck plates and get to know them, it'll make all the difference. I know it made a difference for me when I became an officer, not just leading those folks because I had been an enlisted guy before, but actually having a fuck up of my own. Remember what I was saying? One oh shit erases 1,000 attaboys. One of my first military flights, combat flights over Afghanistan, I accidentally hit the chaff and flare dispenser when our autopilot kicked off. So our autopilot, you have an autopilot set for long flights. This is in the P3 Orion. When you're flying for hours on end, 10, 12 hours, you're not going to sit there and stick fly the airplane. You're going to have the autopilot on. Doesn't mean you're not capable of flying the airplane, but you have that as workload reduction, basically. Well, the autopilot kicked off, and there's a little annunciator light, a red light about the size of, a stick of gum that just glowed red right in my eyes. And I went to block my hand and put the autopilot back on. And in so doing, accidentally with the palm of my hand, hit what they call the bang switch, a big red button, and it dispersed chaff and flares as we just crossed into Afghanistan. So instead of us being dark and quiet, relatively, all of a sudden, poof, it must have looked like a fireworks show. Well, if you're the enemy, you're going to know right where the good guys are, or in this case, I guess we're the bad guys to them, right? I gave away our position. Here's the other problem. The question was, did we get shot, or did that happen by accident? No way to know unless you land. So we had to turn around. We'd already been flying for 4 hours. Now we got to fly home 4 hours back just to find out that we didn't get shot, but some knucklehead Navy pilot hit the bang switch and dispersed the chaff and flares. Not good. Not a good scene. I was not popular when we landed, and I had to admit that it was me and tell not just my crew, but I had to tell the operations officer. Think of the operations officer, just like in a business or a company, as the person that makes shit happen. Not just the CEO or the person that's in charge of, making sure the whole company runs, but the one that actually makes sure the job gets done. That's what the operations officer in a military squadron, a Naval Aviation squadron, does. To say that his words to me were very direct and blunt is a severe understatement. And let's just say it was one of the more supreme ass chewings I've ever received in my life. But at the end, he said, "You know what, dude? We've all been there. We've all done dumb shit. Shake it off. Don't let it happen again. Get the fuck out of here. It was awesome. He addressed the problem. We talked about what caused it and how to not do that again, and how to actually, as a crew and as a squadron, learn from the mistakes so that other crews and other squadrons didn't do the same thing. He didn't kick me out. He didn't fire me. Now, it was a big mistake, huge, egregious mistake, and it could have cost the crew their lives. We could have been shot down. But instead of making it into a bigger issue, we didn't get shot down. We didn't die. The jet came back. We could put the aircraft back in the air the next day. Everything's fine. The mission will get done. And that's the way you have to look at these things. As a leader, you got to realize that one small mistake can basically erase 1,000 great things you do. But it's not about dwelling on either the bad things or the good things. It's about realizing, listen, we got a mission to do. One of the most important lessons I ever learned from going up from the ranks was to be able to understand that people aren't going to be perfect. In fact, if you guys have followed me long enough, you know the whole concept that I teach you is don't be perfect, just be awesome, right? Talk more about that. We'll talk about it in future episodes. That is my personal mantra. But I say that because it's so true. If you are fighting against the idea of being perfect, it is going to kill your performance. And it is a no-no for leadership because you're putting an unreasonable expectation on yourself, an unreasonable expectation on other people, and they can't live up to that. It's invariably going to lead to failure. Not just the kind of failure that is the fuck up. It's the kind of failure that can disrupt an entire culture inside an organization. So you got to get away from that perfectionism. Another topic for another day, but it was an important lesson that I learned working my way up from being an enlisted aircraft mechanic to becoming a combat decorated Navy pilot. And I share that with you today because as a leader, I would never have learned that had I not gone through that gauntlet of experience. And that actually brings me to my final lesson for this episode, and that is this. Your experience matters. It doesn't matter what rank you are in your business, whether you're brand new, starting up something and you feel like you don't have any experience at all. Who am I to lead this thing? Who am I to build this thing? Who am I to serve and help people with my product, my service, whatever my thing is, right? It doesn't matter whether you are working for somebody else. You've got a lot of people answering to you, or you're climbing the ladder. It doesn't matter if you've been around the block. You're very seasoned at what you do. You're excellent at what you do. Your business is successful and all these things. It's very easy to think, hey, man, that's all there is, or this doesn't apply to anything else. Maybe you're one of those people that's leaving a career to start your own thing. You might be questioning whether or not you have any experience. Who are you to start a business with no business experience? Let me tell you, you need to block that shit out. If anybody's telling you shit like that, you need to tell those motherfuckers to fuck off, honestly. Because at the end of the day, your experience in life means more than some book knowledge that you could get or some bullshit you're going to learn on a fucking webinar. You mean to tell me that you really think you're going to learn more about leadership from that kind of stuff than you would from application? I don't think so. And I'm somebody who actually loves to have training like that. I have all kinds of training programs, leadership development programs that I love to bring people through. But at the end of the day, it's not about what you're going to learn in a training. It's about what you learn through application. Your experience in life to this point matters. If you had an experience working, if you had an experience with a previous career or a current one, you can apply the lessons of leadership, personal leadership or group leadership, leadership of yourself or leadership of others, to what you are about to do, building that business, building that brand, writing that book, creating that program, that offer, that service, whatever that thing might be. It definitely applies. And yes, as I told you at the beginning of this episode, this was inspired by basically a person that I trusted and looked to as a friend stabbing me in the back. But I'm not coming to you as a victim. Oh, woe is me. My friend hurt my feelings. No, I actually laughed at it because I was like, this motherfucker has no idea how I had to earn my stripes coming up through the ranks in the military, then turning around and applying it to building a very successful coaching business, then turning around and building very strong teams inside of another organization, then turning around and yada, yada, yada. My friends, No matter where you might be in your life, you have likely been through tough times. You have likely been through tough challenges. You have likely had successes and failures. You've likely had things that have caused you to get scraped, bruised, beaten up, maybe laid flat out on your back, metaphorically or literally, as you climb that ladder of success, as you build that whatever you call personal success or personal excellence. You've had to go through the gauntlet. And guess what? That gauntlet is one of the best leadership development training programs you'll ever go through. It's called Real Life. The School of Hard Knocks is going to be way better than any business school or any military academy or any of this other bullshit. Most important leadership lesson you can learn is from going through the paces and putting in the work, putting in the reps, and actually doing the thing. I will tell you from personal experience, going from the lowest rank in the military to becoming a combat decorated Navy pilot, the best leadership lessons I ever learned didn't come from a book, didn't come from a class, definitely didn't come from a webinar. It came from working with and leading excellent people that started with working on myself and leading myself to become the best version of myself. And you can do the exact same thing starting right now. It's key and essential that you do. And if you don't, if that's not your focus, then maybe leadership wasn't meant for you. But would you really be listening to this podcast if it weren't the case? I doubt it. Your experience matters. Your experience absolutely matters. Yes, you still want to go through all of the stuff, continually sharpening the axe, reading the books, going through the trainings and all the things. I'm not saying don't do that. But what I'm saying is don't feel that your leadership training and development starts and ends with a book or a webinar or a podcast or any of that. That's the genesis of it. Now it's time to put it into action. Now it's time to apply it, and especially doing it with and for awesome people. And when you do that, you will grow to and become the best version of yourself and the best leader you can become. And it will help not just yourself, but the people you're here to lead and the people you're here to serve. All right, my friend, that's what I got for you this week. It's time for you to get out there and start exercising your own leadership. Earn your stripes through that School of Hard Knocks, through the effort of putting it into action, making it happen today and every single day. If you got something from this message, I want you to throw it in the comments. Make sure you share this message far and wide. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can be the first to know and stay in the know when I bring you new content. And remember, no matter what course you fly in life, fly high, fly fast, fly far, stay driven.